Welcome to Blackbriar Gaming. In preparation for the new edition of Horus Heresy, Warhammer Community are going legion by legion, teasing us with rule snippets from the upcoming release. Today, we'll be looking at the 18th Legion, the Salamanders. Just a quick note before we get into it, a subscribe and a like really helps us reach a bigger audience, so if you enjoyed the video, please hit those buttons down below. Alrighty, the Salamanders, or as I like to call them, the Lizard Guys. The Salamanders are just these self-sacrificing heroes who love a bit of heat, love some flames, love some plasma, a bit of radiation, they're all about it. The Salamanders, or the Dragon Warriors, as they were called before reuniting with Vulcan, just couldn't help themselves. They got killed a lot. So their big thing was that they were all about sticking around to the end, sacrificing themselves to help others and save others. And the perfect example was when they were reunited with Vulcan, who I'm pretty sure had been hanging out with the Emperor for a few years beforehand, but decided to step in when his legion were just getting themselves massacred in the defense of some planets' populations. And they just wouldn't quit. Vulcan, he went on down, saved them, and started to reshape them so that they were able to perform, I guess, their role that they needed to without all dying over and over again. The Salamanders are famous for being the bleeding hearts of the 31st millennium, much like they are in 40k. Honourable, absolutely, to a fault. They're probably the only legion that really cares about the plight of mortals. There's plenty of other legions out there that aren't, overtly uncaring or evil. Ultramarines being a good example, but even the Ultramarines don't see mortals as their equals, and certainly don't for that reason. But the Salamander is very different. The way Vulcan organizes them and has them live within the cities of Nocturne really breeds this camaraderie with the mortal humans around them and that they protect. I'm sure this appeals to many. I'm sure there's many gamers out there that like to play a legion that doesn't just treat humans as chaff or disposable. But personally, I'm more of a, wear them as decoration kind of guy. But look, I respect the Salamander sentiment and those that play them. You've got to have some good guys somewhere, right? Vulcan himself is a very likable character, very logical, very stalwart. The tragedy of seeing his legion broken around him breaks his mind, which makes for really interesting reading throughout the Horus Heresy novels. And the whole Vulcan lives thing, that mystery in the early novels and then how you discover it throughout. Really cool stuff, and I definitely recommend giving that a read and digging into that one. His final task as well, I really like it. It's super grim. So the final task for Vulcan, after he teleports himself with his mighty magical hammer to Terra, was to essentially blow up Terra if Horus was successful. That's what Vulcan was there for, which is just, it's so dark. I really like that the Emperor would give the one Primarch who sees humanity as so important, really respects human lives, the final task of destroying all of it. Classic grimdark 30k. Now, unfortunately, the 18th Legion didn't get to play that big a part of the Heresy beyond Isstvan 5, where of course they were betrayed and utterly decimated. There are some cool exceptions where the survivors fight this guerrilla-style war against the traitors, joining up with Iron Hands and a few Raven Guard that haven't been collected up by Corax. So plenty of awesome hobby potential for some really brutal-looking Salamander Black Shields, if you want to go down that route. That's, of course, assuming we get Black Shield rules in the near future, and I've had that question many times. I don't know, but I'm really hoping we do, because it's a great place for Salamanders to hang out. Now, let's get into their rules and see if the rules are true to the Salamanders and what they want to be doing on the table. Now, the first rule we've got is their Legion-wide special rule. The rule is called Blood of Fire, and it reads, when rolling to wound against a model with this special rule, for any attack inflicted by a flame, melter, plasma, or Volkite weapon or effect, reduce the result of that roll to wound by -1. This does not affect the strength of the attack, only the result of the roll to wound. So it wouldn't impact instant death, for instance, just the wound roll. In addition, all models with this special rule that have more than one wound or hull point gain the It Will Not Die 6+ special rule. So, I think this is pretty good. What's it doing? Essentially, when your opponent targets you with one of those 4 kinds of weapons, it means that, let's say they're shooting you with a melter gun into a basic bolter pig, it means that instead of a 2+ to wound, they're going to need a 3+ to wound. So it has that much bigger impact on the high strength weapons. For flame and Volkite weapons, for the most part, it's very similar to having -1 strength because it's probably just nudging that down. Whereas the -1 strength piece that the Iron Hands have, for example, would have no effect on plasma or melter weapons for regular Marines. So this rule itself is better in some ways than the Iron Hand rules, specifically for melter and plasma weapons, but not as consistent in other ways because it's only applying to these 4 types of weapons and not all types of weapons, which the Iron Hands are getting. So look, there is a difference between -1 strength and -1 to wound. Makes a difference really at those high strength weapons. So plasma and melter definitely will not be great firing against salamanders. It'll feel pretty disappointing where you usually get a 2+ no matter what, going down to a 3+. But how common are those weapons, and how common are they going to be shooting them at the units that have this rule? Yeah, I think it's going to be pretty common. So they make a large part of the Heresy firepower that we're seeing here. Volkites in particular, I think, will be very popular in the new edition as we're getting more of them in plastic to put on vehicles and the such upgrades. That special weapon upgrade box that we're seeing, I think, will make tactical support units very popular. And for the most part, you're going to see them kitted out with melter and plasma in other armies. In this army, maybe flamers, but we'll get to that in a second. So I think it's pretty good. It's a little restrictive. It could have been a bit more inclusive of various weapons, but that's fine. They've done it for narrative and lore reasons. I get it. Now, there's a bit of awkwardness here because a lot of the special rules we've seen dictate whether the rule impacts vehicles or not. Now, we can assume that the first part of this rule will not because it stipulates to wound and doesn't talk about armor penetration. It would have been nice to have it spelled out. What this does mean, though, is that will affect lots of other types of units, not just infantry. So dreadnoughts are a perfect example. Dreadnoughts being at -1 to wound for those weapons that probably want to be shooting at them, mainly plasma and melter, and to a lesser extent Volkite, is really nice. It's going to make these dreadnoughts super tough. So that's really cool to see. But for vehicles, no effect whatsoever. The second part of the rule does get in there. So the It Will Not Die 6+ for all salamanders is just really nice. This is going to affect, as I said before, not just infantry, it will affect dreadnoughts, jet bikes, your elite infantry, including terminators, land speeders, and then as well the vehicles with multiple hull points. Now, I'm not sure if there's any vehicles with just one hull point. I can't think of any, but it seems that they've put that there for a reason. So there might be in the new edition, or there might be some rules that I can't remember at the moment for that single hull point. But all in all, it's going to affect just lots of different things. It is, of course, just for infantry with more than one wound. So the It Will Not Die doesn't work for regular infantry who just die instantly. But it's really cool to see this on lots of different units, especially the jet bikes with 2 wounds now, the elite infantry with 2 wounds, your veterans and whatnot, and then the terminators as well. There's so many units that are going to be taking advantage from this It Will Not Die 6+ special rule. I can foresee Salamander players rolling quite a few of these at the start of each turn. I don't think it's game-changing. It's not, whoa, blown away, but it definitely adds another layer of survivability across the army. And I'm really glad that this rule has that second part to it, and it's not just the gimmicky, flame lizard thing that the Salamanders love to do. Notably, it is only for 2 wound infantry, and 2 wound infantry, if they're knocked out in one shot, won't get this, so It Will Not Die will hurt quite a bit for your elite infantry and your salamanders. There are plenty of instances though where your terminators and whatnot will be knocked down to 1 wound, and this will nudge them back up if you're lucky enough to roll that 6+. So overall, I think Blood of Fire is a pretty solid rule, probably about mid-tier when compared to the other legions. And while there will be cases where the first section of the rule doesn't come into play against certain opponents, the second part, that It Will Not Die across the whole force, balances that out a little. And hopefully we do see, for the Salamander's sake, plenty of Volkite, Melted Plasma, and Flamers kicking around in various armies. Now, moving on to the second part of the rules that we've seen here today, the Dragon's Breath weapons. So what are these? Essentially, there's Flamers that are notched up to 11, right? These are pretty nice. So for the most part, you get +1 strength across all the different types of Flamers, which is really cool. But more importantly, the one that I care about a bit more is this Wall of Death bonus that goes from being D3 usually and goes up to D6. Now, the Wall of Death special rule, from my understanding, activates when you conduct Overwatch. So a unit's charging you, you've got a bunch of flamers, you let rip and create just this wall of flame, wall of death, if you will, that the enemy has to run through to get to you. And giving every single one of those flamer D6 hits instead of D3 is some pretty spicy stuff. Charging a unit of 10 tactical support marines armed with strength 5 flamers that do D6 hits sounds absolutely horrific. And if you're only charging with power armored marines, and of course charging within the Wall of Death range limit, and I do believe that's a thing, although maybe not, maybe it goes up to 12, we'll wait and see, you could be losing, wait for this, you could be losing up to 7 or 8 marines on the charge, depending on how the dice go. That is super punishing. For those armies, they're very combat focused and have a lot of power armored units. Space Wolves being a good example, World Eaters, some Night Lords, certainly they're raptors and whatnot. This is going to really hurt them. A Salamanders army with a few of these squads, tactical support squads or pyroclasts, whatever you want to throw in there that have the flame weapons. A few of these squads out the front protecting a bit of a long range fire base could be a huge issue for assault based legions. On top of this, there's actually a Salamander Rite of War that gives tactical support squads and pyroclast squads armed with Dragon's Breath weapons the line unit subtype. So good. So you're going to be able to have, and of course makes them troops. So you're going to be able to have a lot of these units in your army, and they're going to be pushing up the board, capturing objectives, and the enemy's going to have to move towards you to charge you and take you off them, especially because shooting Salamanders might not be as effective with their added toughness from their special rule that we've just looked at. This means you could very feasibly have a whole Salamander army of flame-wielding post-humans, which is really cool. A lot of templates going down all over the place, and assaulting this army would just be horrible. So that's that. Overall, Dragon's Breath weapons, I think, are pretty cool. The strength bonus, obviously great, will be helpful against all armies, and the Dragon's Breath special rule there with the D6 hits, I think, is the real clincher that makes these really good. And that brings us to the end of our Heresy chats for today. Thank you so much for watching. While these rules may not be as powerful as some of the other legions, I think they fit the Salamander's lore nicely and make for some interesting army builds and tactics on the table. Make sure to keep rolling those dice and getting hyped for Heresy.